Welcome back to the Computer Hardware and OS Essentials lecture series. I created these custom lectures based on A+ certification program, but with few enhancements to improve your IT technical skills and knowledge. So if you haven't seen my previous videos, I will leave a link in the description for the playlist. This would be our 13th lecture and we will cover mobile devices. The primary objective of this lecture is to learn various types of mobile devices, identify and use significant features of Android, iOS, Windows Mobile and Chrome OS operating systems, configure wired and wireless connections on mobile devices, and learn how we can backup, synchronize and secure content on mobile devices. So let's look at types of mobile devices. So mobile devices can be categorized into smartphones, tablets or lightweight laptops, e-readers, GPS units, wearable technologies, as well as virtual reality or augmented reality headsets. They are all considered as part of mobile devices. We call these items mobile devices because they are lightweight and usually supported by a built-in battery, hence allowing you to move them around without having to be powered on through a wall plug. So the Oculus Rift communicates with a computer through a wired connection but still falls under the mobile devices category as in A+ certification program because the reason being it is a type of mobile device that can be considered as a part of a mobile device category of items. And as I mentioned, the smartphones are mobile devices, the tablets are mobile devices as well as the laptops. So all of these are considered as part of the mobile device support for A+ certification program. Mobile device operating systems. There are four most popular mobile operating systems. One of them is actually now no longer in use, no longer in production, but however, as an IT technician, you may still come across it. So the operating systems includes the Android OS by Google, iOS by Apple, Windows 10 Mobile by Microsoft, and Chrome OS by Google. The Android OS by Google is based on Linux systems, so the Linux architecture is being used in the Android operating system, and as of this time it is the most popular operating system for smartphones. Apple iOS, which is based on Mac OS, which is also another very popular operating system, as Apple iPhone have taken a very big market share in multiple countries. In the United States, for example, Apple iOS is more popular than Android OS, while Android OS is more popular in countries like India compared to Apple iOS. So depending on the market, Android OS and iOS switch between the popularity. And so that's why these two are the most commonly used mobile device operating systems. Windows 10 Mobile by Microsoft is an older operating system, mobile operating system. It is no longer in production. There is no new releases of this operating system after the final release of 2010. However, this Windows 10 based operating system is still being used by some companies, organizations and small businesses. So as an IT technician, you should know that this particular mobile operating system does exist. Chrome operating system by Google is basically a type of operating system that is very similar to that of Android OS, and it is built on the open source Chromium OS project, which is also the same project that being used as a foundation for your Google Chrome web browser. So Chrome OS by Google is very similar to that of Android OS by Google in a sense that is both kind of based on Linux, even though it is completely different operating systems, and they are both open source as opposed to Apple iOS as well as the Windows 10 Mobile are both closed source operating systems. Android managed by Google. So based on Linux, and it is used, the Linux kernel is what is the foundation for the Android. So it is basically built on the Linux architecture, as I mentioned before. So Linux is an open source operating system that you can get it from the by multiple different vendors. So there are many different flavors of Linux. It's just like Unix. So it is a very open source, and it is supported by many communities, as well as proprietary organizations as well, such as the Linux Red Hat company, for example. And Android is also based on that architecture, and therefore Android is also open source, and Google have decided to keep it as open source to encourage development. Get to know an Android device is a very important thing you should do when you are working in the field, because these are very common devices currently used by either your end users or your corporations and organizations. Even large companies right now have utilized Android cell phones, such as Samsung Galaxy phones, for their workforce, as the other mobile devices being phased out, such as the BlackBerry mobile devices. So in the old days, corporate Canada and corporate America was using mostly BlackBerry devices, but nowadays it is either Android or iOS devices. So you need to be familiar with Android devices. The releases of Android based on desert names from Android 1 to 9, and then they stop using those desert names as of today. So when the Android first came out, the Google started naming the Android versions such as Cupcake, Donut, Gingerbread, Honeycomb, Marshmallow, Oreo, Pie, etc., right? So on and so forth. But now, after Android Pie release, which happened with the Android 9, we just simply use the terms Android 10, 11, 12, etc. So Android started with the Android 1.5 and 1.6. Those are Cupcake and Donut versions. Then we went to Android 2.0, 2.2, 2.3, and then we went through Android 3, 4, 4.1, 4.4, Android 5, etc. And every iteration that the Google has improved the functionalities and features of their Android operating system. So what you need to understand here is that Android releases in the early days are referred by typically the desert names such as Cupcake, Lollipop, Ice Cream Sandwich, Jelly Bean, etc. While Android releases came after Android 9, which is the Pie version of the Android, are just named after the version number, just Android 10, 11, 12, etc. The Android 12L is a special Android version that was released by Google and Android to support mobile devices that are foldable. So such as Galaxy Fold, for example, I believe is running on Android L. So that's why it says Android 12L exists. So in the future, when the Android releases get released, for example, Android 13 and 14, for example, we might have Android 14L for the foldable versions. However, the differences between the Android versions, while they can be significant, the differences between the Android 12 and Android 12L is very minimal. So as IT technicians, there is nothing much you need to worry about the difference between Android 12 and Android 12L, but you should be familiar with the difference between, let's say, Android 6 and Android 8, for example, or Android 6 and 7, for example, because those versions do have some significant changes how the Android operating systems operate. Keep in mind, in this lecture, we will be doing a broad overview of mobile devices and how we can support them as an A+ certified IT technician. I have added some enhancements to this lecture, but I'm mostly sticking with the A+ certification program. So keep that in mind when we go through this lecture. So here's an example of a Nexus smartphone that has Android Oreo operating system installed. Remember, it's an older version of Android, but this familiar configuration can still be seen on your Android devices running 12 or higher up. You basically have a screen which mostly touch sensitive screens. Some Android devices may also have physical keyboards still available even in 2022. But typically it is touchscreen, and you would have the Play Store where you would be getting those Android apps, and you will have apps that can be put together on your screen. And typical apps include things like the dialer, the messages app, which would be your SMS or text app. Most Android devices come bundled together with Gmail app because it is part of the Google ecosystem. And your Play Store account is typically associated with your Gmail account, and that's how you access certain features and functions of your Android device. Android's graphical user interface, also known as GUI, start with multiple home screens. So it have support Windows, panes, 3D graphics, etc. Android operating system can use an embedded browser, manage a database using SQLite, and connect to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular network. So Android operating system can do all of these. Up to 5 apps or groups of apps can be pinned to favorite trays in Android, but with new development of Android 12 and so on, it may get increased. Notification provide alerts and related information about apps and social media, and a digital assistant voice app or app responds to users' voice command with a personable conversational interactions. So that digital assistant typically on most Android cell phones and Android devices gonna be Google, Google Now or Google, Hey Google commands. So those Google commands that you will be associating with would be handled by something called Google Assistants. So Google Assistant is the default digital assistant associated with Android cell phones and Android devices as of 2022. However, when you go and purchase Android devices from companies such as, let's say, Samsung, they may also have their own version or flavors of assistants, such as the Samsung Bixby, for example. Again, we are not going to go into too much depth into all those differences, but just know that the digital assistants do exist in Android managed by Google. So here is another screenshot of the notification shades that includes quick access to the settings app. And when you swipe down, you can access quick settings and notification shades. And these are some of the things that you should be familiar with as a IT technician. Android apps are sold or freely distributed through any source or vendor. So here's one of the big advantage of using an Android device is that you have the ability to load apps either through the official Android store called Google Play, or you could actually load apps from other third-party vendors. Sometimes when you do that, it is also known as side loading. And Google Play will act as the official source of the apps while it is still allowing you to install those apps from other sources. A Google account is required to download content from Google Play, and that's how they're gonna use the authentication and also syncing across your multiple Android devices. To develop Android apps, a developer can download Android Studio. That Android Studio will include the Android SDK, which stands for Software Development Kit tools, as well as an Android emulator. Android Studio is free and is released as open source software. And I believe Android Studio can be installed either on Windows or Mac OS with no issues at all. So here is an example screenshot of Google Play Store, and you can see on the left hand side this, you can search the Google Play for apps and music, ebooks, movies, and many other downloadable items, while on this screen it shows how you can update the install apps on your Android device. Now we're going to switch gear to iOS by Apple. So Apple Inc. develops, manufactures, and sell Apple iPhones and iPad. So unlike Android, where Android is an open source software where developed by Google but used by multiple different manufacturers such as Samsung, HTC, LG, Huawei, etc., etc., the iOS is developed by Apple and it is only used in Apple products such as iPhones and iPad. So it is a proprietary closed source operating system. So both use the iOS operating system developed and owned by Apple, whether it's an Apple iPhone or an Apple iPad. So all of those devices, the different variation of iPads and different variation of iPhones, they all use the iOS. And iOS is based on the Mac OS architecture. The latest release at the time of this writing would be the iOS 12. But as we move forward, the new iOS versions get released just like Android. To get to know an iOS device, you need to understand how iPhones and iPads each have physical side buttons on the upper right side of the device, and iPads and older models of iPhones have physical home buttons on the bottom front, and the newer iPhone X models and the newer versions of iPhones do not have home buttons because they have went with that gesture navigation. Like older version of iPhones and low end of I believe there is one low end iPhone that does have a home button, but typically they don't have it with the newer versions of the Apple iOS iPhones. So keep that in mind. And one other thing about iPhones is that because they are a closed source operating system, the most of the items, including the hardware and all the components, work together as designed by Apple. So while Android give us a lot of flexibility, Apple iOS just makes sure that the Apple products work as smoothly as possible. So that's one of the key advantage of iOS and why iOS is still popular among a lot of people. So Android is a really flexible operating system, but it does have some drawbacks as a result of it. iOS, because it is completely controlled by Apple Inc., including all the way down to the hardware and to the chipset, it is pretty much basically work really smoothly right out of the box. So here is an overall big picture of the timeline of iOS devices. So we started with the iPhone 3G and we went all the way to iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max. And as time progress, these things come up with new Apple iPhones. And when it's come to the point, iPod Touch, which also be running iOS version, a version of iOS. It started with the iPod Touch, the very first one that was released around 2008, and we went all the way to the 7th generation of iPod Touch. iPad, the same thing. And also Apple TV and Apple Watch is also using a version, a type of iOS that is specifically designed for those specific hardware applications. And on the right hand side, you see what a typical Apple iOS screen look like. And if you like to read up more about iOS, I believe the Wikipedia's page is a really good resource for you to follow as an A+ certification student. So the iPhone X series does not have the home button, as I mentioned before, that comes on all previous models of iPhone. So after the iPhone X release, we have no home button at all. Instead, we have gesture navigation. So the older versions of iPhone, such as iPhone 8, you will find the home button, and that may also have some fingerprint scanner where you can unlock the phone. And the newer ones have something called the Face ID, which is how the biometrics identification works with respect to newer version of iOS. So here is the here's how you access the app switcher and the control center from the screen, and you can see on here on this iPad that they are accessing that information by just pulling down the screen at the top. And iOS apps, they are only available through Apple App Store. So it's called the App Store as opposed to Google Play Store. So this is Apple App Store, and the iOS apps are only available through the App Store. And one of the reasoning behind why Apple claimed they do this is to protect security. Other developers can write apps for iPhones or iPads, but these apps must be sent to Apple for close scrutiny. So Apple has very high standards for their Apple apps as opposed to Google, because that's how they run their particular organization or company. iPads and iPods must be activated by signing into the device with an Apple ID or user account. So if you buy an iPad or iPod, it doesn't work right out of the box until you sign in and activate it through an Apple ID, which is another security feature that has been implemented by Apple. Android also have this type of implementation with the Android 12 especially, where if you have a Google Play account, that will be attached to your phone, and if you reset the phone, you must enter that Google Play account password and username in order to reinstall all the Android operating system. And so it does have implemented that as well, even though I haven't mentioned that on my previous slide. So keep that in mind. iPad and iPods must be activated by signing into the Apple ID. The Android devices must be activated through the Google Play Store, because if you don't do that, some functions of your cell phones or Android device may not work. So keep that in mind as well, even though I haven't mentioned that. Options for obtaining Apple apps include the App Store, and also you can get some apps associated especially with music through iTunes, but the iTunes is also part of the Apple ecosystem and owned by Apple themselves. To develop iOS apps, you can download the iOS Software Development Kit or SDK that used to be known as the iPhone SDK, which later Apple changed to iOS SDK, as iOS being used not only on iPhones but also on iPod Touch as well as the iPads. As of 2022, however, Apple has not made it available to run on Windows operating system. So if you were to develop a iOS app on your Windows machine, you may have to run Apple operating system on a virtual box or a virtual machine that would allow you to run the iOS SDK. Otherwise, you won't be able to directly install the iOS SDK onto your Windows operating system. So here is a basic screenshot of the Apple's App Store, and this is where you can go ahead and download new apps to your iPad, iPod Touch, or your iPhone. Windows Mobile by Microsoft is the next one we're gonna cover. And Windows Mobile by Microsoft is a simplified version of Windows OS designed for desktops, laptops, and tablets. And the Windows Mobile 10 corresponds to Windows 10, and Windows Mobile does not have a desktop screen. So as opposed to having a desktop screen like with the typical Windows 10, Windows Mobile 10 doesn't have a desktop screen. It just like Android and Apple iOS, it just have the mobile version, mobile flavoring, mobile graphical user interface design, specifically designed for mobile use. To get to know Windows mobile devices is very important as an IT technician, even though Windows phones are no longer being in production as of 2022, because you still will find those phones and devices in the wild. So most Microsoft phones have 3 buttons below the screens that include the start button to access the start screen, the back button to go back on the screen, and the search button opens the Cortana search box, which is the voice assistant search box, just like Siri for Apple and the Google Assistant for the Android devices. So this Cortana would be the voice assistant for the Microsoft mobile devices. Windows phones rely primarily on start screen for accessing apps, and the start screen looks like this. So this is what the Microsoft Windows start screen look like. So the Windows Mobile by Microsoft will have that, those functions with the back button and the start button and the search, and basically you can press and hold the search button to activate Cortana, and if you hold it down long enough, Cortana will pop up, or you can select the Cortana by selecting the app from your screen as well. And the notification appear in the action center in Windows Mobile, and that is shown on here on this screen. And the setting app provides an extensive toolkit for customizing a Windows smartphone, where you can go into the settings just like any other phone and change some configuration options. Windows mobile apps, availability of apps are limited than what can be found on Android and iOS, especially in 2022. Basically, the Microsoft Store apps are very limited, as Windows Mobile now has been phased out of use. But how you obtain those apps is through Microsoft Store app. Apps can be obtained from third-party websites via the browser on the mobile device as well. So the Microsoft does allow you to bypass the Microsoft App Store or Microsoft Store app to get your apps. And to sign into a Microsoft Store, you have to create an account, and that will be your Microsoft account that you can be used to access your Windows desktop devices as well. Now we're going to switch gear again. This time we're going to be discussing Chrome operating system by Google. So the Chrome operating system is deeply integrated with Google's Chrome browser. So most of the Chrome's operating system's native apps open directly in the Chrome browser and rely heavily on having an active internet connection. In other words, Chrome operating system is basically an internet-based virtual operating system. So you could look at that as like a software as a service, like a SaaS type of cloud-based operating system. So out of all the operating systems that we have discussed today, Chrome operating system is what is really get closer to a cloud-based software service. So the Chrome OS functions exclusively on Chromebooks. Then those Chromebooks can be manufactured by Samsung, Asus, and many other companies. So manufacturers are different, but they can install the Chrome operating system on their hardware. And you need to get to know how Chrome operating system work, the Chromebook operating system work, because again, you may come across these devices in the field. And the Chromebooks comes with a variety of external ports. The keyboard looks very similar to that of a typical laptop keyboard that we use with Windows or Linux machine, but there are a few differences on the keyboard as well, which I will show you on my next slide. And the Chrome operating system is automatically updated about every 6 weeks. This includes some significant security measures to protect computer against malware. So keep that in mind. So one of the key features that you need to understand with the Chrome operating system is that Chromebooks are basically not a replacement for your laptops. These are actually a type of operating system that is very lightweight and can run on very low-end hardware, which is low-cost hardware, and allow you to do certain things using basically internet-based applications, and they usually run on the Chrome browser itself, and that's how those applications can provide those different services. So here's a screenshot of the Chromebook keyboard. So they are slightly different from a regular Microsoft keyboard or the Apple MacBook keyboard. You have the search key and you have those previous keys at the top. You have the immersive mode key and the overview mode keys. Those are not typical keys that you will find in other devices that are specifically designed for other operating systems. So keep that in mind. And here is the Chrome OS desktop, what it looked like as of 2022. So basically you have a status tray, you have app launchers, and you have setting windows. And it's very similar to that of a Linux operating system because Chrome OS is basically based on Linux, but they are different in a way that how it operates and function. So Google's approach to security with Chrome operating system includes the sandboxing, verified boot, power washing, and quick updates. So those are the 4 ways that the Google try to address the security issues. So I'm not going to go into detail or in depth of how each of these items work, but know that these security approaches are being used by Google to secure Chrome operating system. Chrome OS apps, basically the Chrome shelf contains icons for important apps. Most apps open in Chrome browser, as I mentioned before, because they are not actually directly installed on the device itself. Users can get more apps through the Chrome web store app, and again you can sign into those web store app using a Gmail account. Some newer Chromebooks support Android apps downloaded through Google Play Store app as well. With respect to that, the Windows 11 actually do support some Android and as well as Amazon App Store apps on Windows 11 desktop computers as well. So some of these companies are actually working together to make your user experience better. Like for example, Windows have also pushed some software to support the Android mobile devices or through their desktop system. For example, I can connect my Samsung Android phone directly to my Windows 11 computer because Google and Microsoft have worked together to build that architecture. So some of these companies are actually working together on cross-platform shareability. Comparing open source and closed source operating systems. So developers of iOS, which is a closed source operating system, only have access to APIs which are calls to the operating system. Apps must be tested and approved before being sold in the Apple App Store. It better assurance of high quality apps, so which basically makes sure that the apps are very high quality and they have a centralized app purchasing system, right? So those are some of the advantages and as well as some disadvantages of iOS because it's a closed system, right? Android apps, however, they are open source and can be obtained from many sources. There is no assurance of quality on those, especially those separate open source, areas. Like there is some quality assurance in the Google Play Store, but there is no quality assurance, especially on some third-party app stores that deal with Android devices. Market is not always convenient for developers because there are many variations of Android exist as well as many variations of Android devices exist in the market. As a result, the developers need to develop their app according to those needs and specifications. For example, I have a Android Samsung phone, which that is a S22 Ultra. But before that, I used to have a S9 Plus. But the S9 Plus is still in use. Like my brother used a Samsung S9 Plus. So an Android developer who's developing an app today, as of 2022, have to make sure that app also works not only on my S22 Ultra, but also the older versions such as S9 Plus. But the versions of Android between those devices are also different. So that's why there are many variations of Android exist. So it has to do with the manufacturer too. So we are HTC, LG, Samsung, they all make Android devices, and also within the same manufacturer there may be different variations of Android as well, depending on the version of the phone. For example, S9 Plus versus S22 Ultra. Configuring and syncing a mobile device. In this part of the chapter of this lecture, you will learn to configure network connections and to update and backup data content and settings on mobile devices. So the first thing you need to do is you need to be able to find the place where you can go to change those settings. So most of these settings you need to use to support mobile devices are in the settings app, whether it's iOS, whether it's Android, whether it's Windows Mobile, in case that you come across Windows Mobile, even though it is now phased out operating system. Most of these settings, this kind of syncing information on mobile devices can be found under setting app. If you get stuck, check the user guide, because all of these devices, all of these organizations have user guides, and use it. As an IT technician, you should use it. In fact, one of the best tools that you can use as an IT technician is Google or searching it out. There's nothing wrong with searching an answer when you get stuck on something as an IT guy. So keep that in mind. I know there are a lot of jokes about IT people Googling stuff, but there's nothing wrong with that because we are actually using a tool to find a user guides and information. So here is an example of a screenshot of the Android setting apps on the this A screen, and the iOS setting apps on the B screen. So this screenshot. So the A screenshot is showing the settings that you can find typically on an Android operating system. On the B screen right here is the screenshot of what you typically would find on an iOS settings app on a Apple device. So that's how, that's where you find most of the things that you need to get access to as a IT technician. Mobile device LAN WAN connections. A mobile device might have several antennas. Those include the Wi-Fi, GPS, Bluetooth, NFC, and cellular. So those could be combined into one single antenna in some situations, or a couple of these items may be combined into one antenna, but most of the time those have different antennas. Settings on device allow you to enable or disable each of these antennas, even if they are combined together. So like sometimes physically, some of these antennas may be combined together in terms of actual physical module of antennas, but in terms of logical architecture, Wi-Fi antenna is different from GPS antenna, different from Bluetooth antenna, different from NFC antenna, and different from cellular antenna. So therefore, logically, all of these items are independent, or even physically they could be independent. As a result, the settings on a device will allow you to either enable or disable each of these items one at a time, separate from and independent from each other. Network connections are configured using the settings app, and Wi-Fi connections are the one that we're going to look in a little bit detail now. So on the Wi-Fi settings screen, you can add a Wi-Fi connection, manage existing networks, view available Wi-Fi hotspot, and see which Wi-Fi network you are connected to, turn Wi-Fi on or off, and decide whether the device should ask the user before joining a Wi-Fi network. So all of these things, for example, can be done through the Wi-Fi settings. So on this screen, for example, here is a iOS device with the Wi-Fi connections showing here, and you can see that you can turn on the Wi-Fi, you can turn off the Wi-Fi radio, so that radio antenna can be either turned on and off, and you can select which Wi-Fi network that you can connect to that is available nearby as that Wi-Fi antenna pick up those signals. So there are a bunch of networks showing up, and they are connected to Luigi network as right here. So here's an example of mobile Wi-Fi connection. Tethering and mobile hotspot is the next item that we're going to look into in detail. So when a mobile device is connected to the internet by the way of cellular network, you can allow other computers and devices to use this same connection. An app on the smartphone controls these connections. To use your phone for tethering and for providing mobile hotspot, your carrier subscription must allow it. So it is a type of service that has to be supported by your service provider, because it can be blocked or locked by your service provider depending on your service plan, and where you live. Like in Canada, most of the mobile data plans will allow tethering, but in some countries, for example India, for example, I know there are some mobile data plan that does not allow tethering whatsoever. So what tethering is going to do, it's going to convert your cell phone into basically a wireless router, and then your cell phone's cellular data network can be used by nearby devices to connect to the internet. So that's what the tethering does. I have already gone over a little bit about tethering on my previous lectures on this series. So if you want to learn more, you can go back on my YouTube videos on my YouTube channel and watch them to get a better understanding. That's all I'm going to cover for now for this particular topic. So the next topic we're going to cover is a cellular data connection. That must have a subscription with your carrier that includes a cellular data plan. Again, in some countries, you may only have data plan available in certain areas and may not in other areas. And in Canada, most areas do have data connection plans that you can buy. And information that must be used when connecting is first made include the IMEI number, IMSI number, and ICCID number. IMEI number is a unique number that identifies each mobile phone or tablet or device. So you can have a tablet device or like a mobile device that do have a direct cellular connection, and that's how that's going to work with the SIM card is using the IMEI. IMSI is a unique number that identifies a cellular subscription for a device or subscriber. So that is basically a unique subscriber identification. ICCID is identify the SIM card and if the card is used, and then that information get relayed based on these numbers. So keep that in mind, that not all parts of the world will have the coverage for mobile wireless data connection. Same goes for actually cell phone cellular signals as well. Even in Canada, some mountainous regions in, for example, Banff National Park, for example, when I go there for hiking, don't have that kind of coverage. So keep that in mind. Just because of you have a cellular data connection and a plan doesn't mean that you have coverage everywhere. So make sure that you educate your end user on that as well. So GSM and LTE require a SIM card to be installed in the device, and almost every single device sold in Canada as of 2022 is either GSM or LTE. So all of your devices should have a SIM card installed. When a carrier uses a SIM card, you can sometimes move the card from one device to another. When a carrier does not use a SIM card, you must contact the carrier and request permission to switch devices. But also you need to understand that some carriers may have SIM locks on your cell phone and your device, and you may not be able to transfer the SIM card from the next to the next device, from current device to next device. In that case, you need to also contact your carrier to unlock your SIM card or device so that you can move around between different devices. You might find that you want to disable cellular data or cellular roaming sometimes. And to disable roaming on an Android device, you go to the setting menu and go to network and internet menu and tap mobile network, then turn off mobile data or roaming. On an iOS device, you open the settings menu again and tap cellular data and turn off cellular data by tapping the cellular data options, and then turn off the roaming from there. Next, we're going to discuss the VPN connections. So a mobile device can be configured to communicate securely over a virtual private network, also known as VPN. So I have already introduced you to VPN on my previous lecture. So if you want to know how exactly VPNs work and how they are differ, there are multiple lectures that I have posted, including Cisco CCNA lectures on VPN, as well as this lecture series VPN lecture. So you can go ahead and check that out. So I'm not going to go in any depth here. So to create a VPN connection in the settings app, tap the VPN and then tap add new VPN connection. And then you basically follow the instructions to complete the connection. It is very simple. And some Android devices also provide proprietary VPN configuration options, such as the Samsung VPN connections that sometimes comes in certain Samsung devices. To access VPN settings in iOS, open the settings app, tap general, and then tap VPN, and then you can set up by just following the basic instructions. So here is a screenshot of a VPN configuration on an Android. They are going to ask certain information, and all of this information should be provided to you by your VPN provider. Accessories and their PAN connections. When buying accessories for a mobile device, be sure to check what ports and slots are available on the device. For example, many mobile devices no longer include replaceable batteries. So should you buy a battery for your phone? Sure, if you are willing to pull apart the back side of your glued in phone and gonna replace that battery, because nowadays you can't just simply remove the battery. So when I say that many mobile devices no longer include replaceable batteries, what I mean is user replaceable batteries. So user needs to spend more time if you want to replace a built-in battery, right? You still can replace the battery on an iPhone. You can still replace the battery on an Android phone. It is easier to replace the battery on an Android phone than an iPhone, due to Apple being proprietary and anti repair policies that Apple have implemented. That's a whole different discussion that I will do later, but it is not end user replaceable. That's what I mean by it's no longer include replaceable batteries. So you can replace many of the mobile device batteries, but it is not end user replaceable. It's not like just open the back panel and put a new battery in. You have to go through much more vigorous process of heating up the back panel, slowly removing it, and gluing the back panel together. It's such a pain to do it nowadays. Wired connections for accessories. Those include wired connection that can be used to change the device, charge the device, download software updates, upload data to the computer, backup data, and restore software or data. Some USB connectors used for this purpose includes the micro USB, mini USB, and the newer version of the USB we call the USB-C. Remember, on my previous lectures, I mentioned the USB-C does not mean that is USB 3.0. USB 3.0 is a USB standard for the speed and the bandwidth. It is not a standard of a type of USB. So you may get USB-Cs that are not USB 3.0, but 99% of the time, most of the USB-C ports going to be USB 3.0. Newer Apple iPhones, iPods, and iPads use the proprietary Lightning port and connector for power and communication, because just Apple wants to be pain in the butt for all our IT technicians and everybody. They just don't want to go with the USB Type-C. So they, instead of using universal connections, they are forcing their users to go with these Lightning connectors. Again, regarding those proprietary policies of and the actions of Apple, European Union have already passed a law. I believe within the next few years, all devices must have USB-C, but Apple may find a way to circumvent that. Maybe they will go all wireless only. So that's something to keep in mind. So Apple being Apple, it's just the way it is. An Android device may provide a memory card slot to allow extra storage. Again, some newer Android devices such as S22 Ultra, for example, does not have expandable storage such as memory card slot, just because of Samsung being Samsung in this case, just like the Apple. And sometimes this type of SD support is built into the SIM card or the SIM card tray slot. Like for example, right here, we have the SIM card going in right here. That's why I say SIM, and you can put your expandable micro SD card storage right on the same tray, and that's how you will be inserting your micro SD card. So there is no separate slot for your micro SD card. It is the same slot, same tray, but it has two locations, one for the SIM card and one for your micro SD card. So keep that in mind. Some mobile devices may connect to a computer using USB port, as I mentioned before, and some may use the different types of those USB ports, like depending on the device that you use. Like for example, it could be the standard Type A, it could be the mini USB that looks like this one, and it could be the micro USB. So this is the standard type. This is standard Type A one. And then you could have micro USB. So that's the micro USB this side, and this is the mini USB. Then this is the standard side, and here's the USB Type C, which is reversible. You can put it in either way, either direction. So it is a symmetrical design, and on this side is basically the standard Type A USB on the other end. You could get a USB cable that is USB Type C on both ends as well, because newer computers do support and newer chargers do support USB-C to USB-C connection as well. And when it's come to the point, Apple again, Apple being Apple, they have their own proprietary connectors. So we have in the older Apple devices, we have the Apple 30-pin dock connector. Then we went from there to Apple Lightning connector. We do have some Apple devices that have micro USB and mini USB and traditional USB, but most of the time the Apple connector is going to be either Apple 30-pin dock connector or Apple Lightning connector. And the Apple Lightning connector is also a reversible connector that can go in either direction. That means it is universal in either direction. You can plug it in, and it looks like this with bunch of pins on either side, and the lightning port look like that. And that's what you would get from the Apple proprietary connectors. Wireless connections for accessories. So Bluetooth is a short-range wireless technology to connect two devices in a small PAN environment. So that PAN is a type of a network connection, right? Remember, I already have covered that in my previous lectures as well. So devices must be paired. So a process you will learn more about later when we go through some of the things in here. The infrared is another wireless technology, also known as IR, that is commonly used to turn on and off televisions and radios and etc. in the past. And that kind of wireless connection requires an unobstructed line of sight between the transmitter and the receiver within 30 meters of each other. Now, older Samsung phones have built-in infrared blasters where you can use the Samsung phone as a TV remote, but newer Samsung phones and newer devices, most of them don't have it. But some companies like Oppo and HTC still does have infrared support for some of their cell phones. When it's come to the point, tablets, some tablets still do have, especially Android tablets such as Samsung tablets, still do have the infrared blaster built into it. The near-field communication, also known as NFC, is a wireless technology that establishes a communication link between two NFC devices that are within 10 centimeters of each other. So it has to be very close to each other. And it is used for contactless credit card payments at a store. An NFC tag contains a small microchip that can be embedded in just about anything, and tag dispenses information to any NFC-enabled smartphone or other devices. And you can not only use NFC for mobile payments, like or credit card payments, financial transaction. NFC tags can also be used to for automating things. Like, for example, I can buy an NFC tag and I can program it. Every single time I go and tap that NFC tag with my cell phone, my lights turn on, for example, or my gates open or my gate close, for example. So you can do things like that with NFC tags as well. So NFC is not just necessarily limited to credit card payments and financial transactions. I have covered some of the NFC items on my previous lectures, so you can watch them as well. Next, we're going to look at configuring mobile device email. So email can be managed in one of two ways, either using the web browser that is in your mobile device or using an email client. Obviously, using an email client would be more efficient because it is purpose-built application to access email, as well as it will allow your end user to receive emails on the go. So it, like, instead of accessing a web browser, if you have the mobile client, email client, as soon as an email comes in, he will get a message, he or she will get a message, right? They will have that email right there, right then when it receives. So using an email client is much better option than using a web browser to access email from your mobile device. To configure email on a mobile device, open the email app and add an email account directly in the app. So depending on the app that you use, because you can use Gmail, you can use Outlook, you can use Outlook to access Gmail, you can use many other mobile applications that are specifically designed to access email, act like email client, and depending on that app, the configuration may be slightly different. However, the information you need to set it up would be similar. So you would need your email address and the password. You'll need the name of your incoming and outgoing email servers. In other words, your incoming and outgoing email server addresses. You need to have the type of protocol which your incoming server going to be using. Either it's going to be POP or IMAP, depending on your configuration, and the security you will be using. With Android devices, with respect to Gmail, it's very simple. On the Gmail app, you enter your Gmail account and authenticate. It will does all of these for you. But if you use, let's say, Microsoft Outlook for mobile, the mobile client, and you're setting up with your school, your company, your organization, your work, for example, those configuration may differ slightly based on how your administrator of your email have set those things up. Syncing and backing up mobile devices. Different syncing and backups. So syncing mirror app data and other content among your devices and the cloud that use the same Apple or Google account. So that's what it does. So syncing basically mirror app data and other content among your devices. So it's just going to make sure that, let's say if you have a photo, you take a photo from your Samsung cell phone, right? And if it is syncing to your Google Drive, when you go to your Google Drive from your desktop computer, you will see that photo right away. So that's what the syncing does. It's mirror data across multiple devices. It could be your personal data or a user created data or even app data for that matter. Backups are copies of app data, configuration settings, and other content stored in case you need it to recover from a fail, lost, or corrupt device. So backup is not the same as syncing. So a lot of people get confused about syncing versus backup. So syncing doesn't necessarily mean that you can use those sync data to bring back all your settings and information back to life, in a case of a disaster. So backup is different. So just because of you have syncing turned on a device doesn't mean it is secure in terms of like data loss. So make sure you not only turn on the syncing but also turn on the backup. Sync to the cloud. So Google's storage in the cloud, as they offer the Android syncs Google apps or third-party apps on your device to Google storage at google.com, and you can go to the settings app and manage it and how it is sync and what is sync into that cloud. iCloud storage in the cloud offer the iPhone users and iPad users and Apple iOS users basically to sync contact to the Apple website iCloud.com. And to set up iCloud syncing, you can go to the setting app and tap the username and tap the iCloud to go to the screen to manage and what is being synced. In here that they mentioned not the contact, the content. So the Apple content, sorry about that. So basically it again, just like the Google Sync, the Apple can sync all your content such as the pictures, the videos, images, and the contacts and everything to the iOS cloud. And these type of cloud storage sync may also do the backup at the same time, but please make sure they are doing not only the sync but also backups, because those are slightly two different things. So you need to just make sure that all of these are done properly. So here's how you access Android content at google.com. You can basically open a Google Chrome, and on the corner of the Google Chrome, you will see this Google Apps Launcher, and you'll see all the apps that you have access as long as you have logged in. In this case, this person has been logged in, and these are the things that they have access to. And here is a example of iCloud synchronization and management on the Apple iOS device, and the device itself. Under the settings, you can see that certain items you can turn on or off. Like for example, this person have decided the mail not to be synced to the iCloud, but you can select it to be synced. Same with the messages, you can decide whether it's to be synced to the cloud or not. So those are some of the options that you have with the Apple iCloud syncing. Sync to the desktop. So manual syncing options are also available to those of you who do not like to use cloud storages and cloud backup. I don't blame you, because reason of that is there have been many leaks of data with respect to clouds, including iCloud leaks in the past. So you can do manual syncing, and you can do that with the USB connection and File Explorer. You can use iTunes for doing that with the iOS devices. With the Android devices, you don't even need a software. You can simply connect to the any Windows machine or Linux machine, and you can browse through the File Explorer and file browsers on Linux, and then copy and paste or save your data to your desktop machine. Automatic syncing options includes third-party apps such as OneDrive, Dropbox, etc., and backup and sync app with Android, as well as iCloud Drive with iOS do exist as well. And here's an example, a screenshot of iTunes being used to sync or backup a mobile device with a Mac or Windows computer. And in this case, it's going to be like an iOS device. And this is how you basically going to do it. And then here's an example of how synchronization apps onto a Windows computer can be done. And you can have a Windows computer and that have set up iCloud Photos, Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, those kind of drives. If you do this, you don't even need to connect your cell phone directly to your Windows machine. You simply open your Windows machine's File Explorer, and as soon as you sync your mobile device to the cloud, whether it's a OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, or iCloud, you can simply access it directly through your Windows machine because you have already authenticated and access your cloud accounts through your File Explorer. So you can do that here as well. Sync and activity with hands off and continue on PC. So Apple has something called Apple Handoff that enable handoff in settings menu on the iPhone or iPad and in the system preference menu on the Mac. I have to admit this. There is no other company, no other operating system as smoothly doing this type of handoff as Apple. In fact, the Android one is pretty much broken at this point in 2022. What is a handoff basically means is basically, let's say you are watching a movie and you want to watch the rest of the movie instead of from your cell phone, but from your laptop. Apple will do a very smooth job. Same with let's say you are on a website and you are halfway through reading through a website and you want to send it to your computer. Apple does it very smoothly. So there's Apple handoff is very smooth. You can go even to your Windows machine from your Apple iPhone with no issues at all. Microsoft also has something called Microsoft Launcher or Continue on PC that allow Windows 10 an Android app called Microsoft Launcher or an iOS app called the Continue on PC to be synchronized between the two. But the thing is that handoff is not as smooth as you think. So the new version of the Microsoft also does have the ability to sync across your mobile devices to your Microsoft device. It is called basically the phone link. So here's an example of phone link. So I have my S22 Ultra that can be sync or link onto my S22, but the thing is it is not as smooth as what the Apple has to offer, in my opinion. So keep that in mind. So the handoff still works, but not as smooth as Apple when it comes to deploying the Android operating system. Excuse me. So here's screenshots of some of those handoffs. So the tap Continue on PC, pick up an Android activity on your Windows desktop. It's shown here on the A. The Microsoft Launcher has made subtle changes to the Android home screen, and that's what it looks like. And then the launcher's all startup app screen is similar to Windows start screen. So that's shown here with these screenshots. Sync to an automobile. So many newer automobiles offer the option to use Bluetooth to pair smartphone with the car's computer for easy access to the phone's music, navigation, and call features. So you can, sync your mobile data, especially contact information, to your automobile. Like for example, I have a Lexus RX and it syncs my contacts to its own storage. So even if my phone get disconnected, I still have access to some of the information, even though I can actually use that information to directly call from my Lexus because it doesn't have a cellular connection. So newer automobiles do offer Bluetooth Bluetooth syncing as well as storage as well. And it also allows you to use your mobile device such as your cell phone or iPad or Samsung tablet to be connected to your vehicle for listening to music and navigation, and allow some call features. That includes things like Android Auto and Apple CarPlay as well, because those are specialized app or applications that are built into your automobiles as well as your mobile devices to communicate that information across the mobile, automobile and your cell phone. Update the operating system. So updates to the Androids are automatically pushed to the device from the manufacturer. But however, you should periodically check for updates under settings. So all Android devices, if you go to the settings, you can check for available updates, and you should check them once in a while, because sometimes those push notifications may not get pushed properly. So I would recommend that you actually check once in a while if there is an update for your particular device. And with Android having multiple manufacturers such as Samsung, HTC, LG, Sony, etc., the Android updates are not very smooth. So for example, some Samsung newer phones may have the newest version of the Android, but some other Android phones and some LG newest phones may not have the same update, because they are not synchronizing across multiple vendors and multiple devices, as opposed to Apple, because they control their hardware, they control their software. The updates are typically released at the same time. Like for example, my Samsung S22 Ultra still hasn't got an update that has already been released in countries like India, because the Canada has not yet decided to release that update to my Samsung phone. So keep that in mind. So to check and install for update on iOS devices, you must first sign into your device with the Apple ID, because that's one of the Apple security features, and then open the settings app and tap general in the left pane, and on the right side tap software update, and that's how you update an Apple iOS device. Backup and recovery. So remember, I mentioned that syncing is not backup is not syncing. So this is where this will also come into play. So some options for backup and recovery include file level backup, partial image level backup, and combination of file level and partial image level backups. Android provides a way to backup to Google Drive. So the Google Drive backup enabled by opening the settings app, go to system and tap the backup, and then you can backup to the Google Drive that is installed, right? And backup to a computer can also be done, and you can do that through third-party app or manufacturer's app. And when it's come to the point image level backup, they are typically only supported at the manufacturer's apps, not at the level of the third-party app. It's either manufacturer's app or the Google Drive app. They may be support the image level backup. So what are the differences basically? So the file level backup will backup your files. So those are mostly end user created files and documents. And partial image level backup will backup some of the settings and core information about your operating system, and the combination of file level and partial image level backup will do the both of them. So that's what it means. So image level backup basically means the image of your operating system, certain configuration and features. So when it's come to the point iOS backups, iOS can be backup to the computer using iTunes or the cloud using the iCloud. So the iCloud backup, you can go to the settings and tap the username and then tap iCloud and scroll down to the iCloud backup, and you can set how and what being backup to the iCloud. iTunes backup, what it is it's a desktop application. So you open the iTunes, whether it's a Windows desktop iTunes or the Apple version of the iTunes on your computer, and connect your mobile device to the computer, and you might have a password that you need to enter, and once you do that, you select the device and click backup now, and that will backup your Apple iOS devices onto your personal computer. Securing a mobile device. To keep your data safe, consider controlling access to your device and consider what apps can use to protect the data. So you need to think about different way of securing your mobile device, not just one way of securing mobile device. So I will go through some of the options of securing mobile devices in next few slides. So device access controls is a very good way to secure your device. So lock methods to control access to the device include the screen lock, swipe lock, pin lock, passcode lock, pattern lock, fingerprint lock, face lock. So now in modern 2022 Apple iOS devices only have face lock. They don't have actually the fingerprint lock, but they do have the pin lock and the other passcode lock and etc, etc. The Android devices, depending on the manufacturer, you may have the fingerprint lock, you may have fingerprint lock and face lock, and you may not have either of them. In that case, you will have to go with the pin lock or something else. So here is two screenshots. So the first screenshot shows the lock options on an Android smartphone, and the second screenshot shows the smart lock exceptions to keep the screen unlocked in certain times. So you can actually create a situation where don't unlock if if you have a smart watch, for example, Samsung watch nearby, and then make your cell phone unlock. I don't typically recommend doing that because that still creates security vulnerabilities, but you can do that. But that's basically what it basically do actually. As long as your Samsung watch is nearby, your cell phone will remain unlocked. It's not bad, but it could create some security vulnerabilities, so keep that in mind. So screen lock options, as I mentioned, will restrict failed logging attempts. So you can specify that data be erased after a certain number of failed logging attempts or block further attempts. Full device encryption can be done as well. So you can encrypt all the stored data on a device. I just want to say one note on that full device encryption. I've seen a lot of cell phones where people encrypt the data within the cell phone storage, but forgot that there are data stored on the SD card. So if you're doing full device encryption, make sure you enable encryption not only for the device storage, but also SD card storage if you have expandable memory. So I've seen certain situations where some companies and organizations have encrypted cell phones, but their SD card data is not encrypted. So make sure when you do full device encryption, you enable device encryption on both the SD card as well as the device itself. This is a special note on Android devices because some Android devices do have expandable memory. Multi-factor authenticator or multi-factor authentication is another method of securing your device that requires two forms of authentication to access the device or certain features or apps. The authenticator applications can be installed on your smartphone and configured to provide the multi-factor authentication support for a variety of account types. So it is a two-way street. So you can use multi-factor authentication actually to block certain apps on your phone too, but also what mostly in 2022 the multi-factor authentication is used is like you're trying to log into let's say a banking website from your desktop computer. It will ask you to open up the multi-factor authenticator on your cell phone. It could be the banking app itself, or it could be a separate app that you use to authenticate who you are. So multi-factor authentication is a really good option to use to secure your online accounts as well. So again, multi-factor authentication can be done where you are accessing a app or a feature or accessing a service on the internet where you need to authenticate, where your cell phone will be used as a secondary authentication mechanism, or multi-factor authentication can be used or implemented on your cell phone itself where you block certain apps or features until you authenticate with your fingerprint or something like that. So that's what I meant by multi-factor authentication. So the device software security is the next one we're going to quickly cover. So the software can help secure data. So just make sure operating system updates and patches are done as soon as possible. Sometimes it may be a good idea to install antivirus and anti-malware, even though it is not necessary in most cases. Even Android devices don't need antivirus software, but you can install it if you think your end user might run into some issues. Make sure you always use the trusted sources to download apps, especially when you are using Android, because that is really important. Even if you use Apple App Store, make sure that you are downloading apps that you trust, because certain apps may have certain configurations that you don't want or you don't like, that may not break the Apple privacy policies and rules and regulations, but something that you don't prefer to have. You also can set up firewalls. Yes, there are mobile firewalls you can set up. Android Locate application and remote wipe is a really good feature that you can also utilize. If you lose your cell phone, you can quickly locate your cell phone using the GPS coordinates, and you can wipe data or lock your device until you get to that device. iOS Locate application can also do the remote wipe and location feature as well for your iOS devices. So here is a screenshot of the which app can install, source other than App Store. You can install certain apps outside the App Store. So you can allow apps from outside the Google Place to be installed on your Android device, but you can also block that from happening as well. So that's a security feature. So right here it shows install unknown apps, and you can either allow it or disallow it in the settings of your Android device. Here's a screenshot of the locating a Android device that been lost. So they have located the Android device using the GPS location GPS coordinate of that particular cell phone by just simply going into Google. So if you don't know where to go in to find your Android device, here's something really neat about Google. You can just go open up a web browser, as long as you are logged in to your Google account, and you can Google search find my device, find my Android device, or find my device, and as soon as you click it, it will open up and it will give you all your devices listed, because you are already logged in to your Google Chrome web browser. It will list all your devices, and it is very easy to find. And obviously Apple does have a locator app as well, but it is very similar to that of the Google Find My Device as well. Mobile security in corporate environments. So here's the thing about corporate environment. It can be very complex if you have bring your own device configuration. However, with modern IT infrastructure, rest assured that you can manage all of those small technical issues associated with BYODs. So an employee or student is allowed to connect his or her own device to the corporate network. That's what basically what the BYOD gonna do. For security purposes, as an IT technician, an organization you need to configure the person's device before allowing it to connect to the network. So for security purposes, as an organization, as an IT technician, you need to make sure that you have done those configuration correctly. Utilize security profiles, which are set of policies and procedures to restrict how a user can access, create, and edit organizations' resources. These type of security profiles do come into play in our next generation firewalls as well, which I haven't covered on my YouTube channel yet. That's going to be a new lecture series that I will be posting to my YouTube channel. So the security profiles can be part of your servers that gonna implement your wireless or wired network, but it also can be a part of your next generation firewall. Profile security requirements can be partially implemented by configuration of requirements placed on the bring your own device and corporate owned devices and employee users. Part of these requirements will likely include installation of remote backup applications as well. So keep all of those things in mind. So again, I'm giving you a high level overview of this, but I'm not going to go into any more detail than this, because for your A+ certification exams, that's not a requirement at this point. Common mobile device malware symptoms. So this is the last topic that we're going to cover, malware symptoms and how you can remove malware. Again, this is a very high level overview. I'm not going to go into little details in this lecture, just to keep the lecture the time period as short as possible. So the symptoms that might indicate a malware might be at work include the power drain, slow data speeds, high resource utilization, leaked personal files or other data, strange text messages, and data transmission over the limits. So that's a common symptoms. Other symptoms include the drop phone calls or weak signal, unintended Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connection, unauthorized account access, unauthorized location tracking, unauthorized use of camera or microphone. With new Android devices, whenever your device is using camera, microphone, or any other component that can be used to breach your privacy, it shows up on the top right hand corner or top left hand corner with a small icon saying something in your phone or your tablet is using your camera or microphone or your Wi-Fi GPS, for example. You can set that thing up, so that will be an indicator. But you should educate your end user on all of these items, these indicators, these symptoms, so that they are aware of the dangers, so they can actually identify it and mitigate it as soon as possible. Mobile device malware removal. So general steps for removing malware from a mobile device is basically uninstall the offending app, update the operating system, and if those things doesn't work, then maybe perform a factory reset. Even if you think uninstalling the bad app and updating the operating system did fix it, I would still perform a factory reset if you really want to make sure that any traces of that malware is removed from the device. A few tips to keep a mobile device clean include keep an OS updated to the current version. So whatever the OS that you're running, whether it's a iOS, whether it's a Windows Mobile, or whether it's the Android OS, please update to the current version. Windows Mobile is no longer releasing any more updates, but still you can make sure that it has the highest patch level, highest update that has been released that has been released by the Microsoft the last time they did it. So just make sure that it is done properly. Educate users about the importance of privacy settings and not opening email attachments or downloading shared files from untrusted sources. So just like any desktop computer or laptop, you can educate your end user about opening items from untrusted senders. Consider installing an anti-malware app. So especially when it's come to point Android, you don't need an anti-malware app, but if you think your end user might run into some trouble, you may want to install an anti-malware app. And that is the end of this lecture. And if you like these type of lectures, please thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, good luck with your exams and have a nice day.